The morning of July 19th, 1943, began like any other at the Luftwaffe's Rechlin test facility, 90 miles north of Berlin. Oberst Friedrich Christiansen, chief of the Lufterprobungsstelle's bomber evaluation section, received an urgent teletype from Luftwaffe High Command. A mostly intact American B-24 Liberator had been forced down near Bremen after a raid on the submarine pens. The aircraft and its crew were being transported to Rechlin immediately. Priority: absolute. Classification: Geheime Kommandosache, secret command matter. Christiansen had evaluated captured Allied aircraft before: a Spitfire Mark Five in 1942, several Hurricane variants, even a Soviet Pehtwooo bomber that had strayed over German lines. But this was different. The Americans had been flying daylight precision bombing missions over the Reich for nearly a year, claiming accuracy that German intelligence dismissed as propaganda. No bomber could hit specific factory buildings from 5 miles up while being shot at. The physics didn't allow it. Yet American post-strike reconnaissance photos kept showing destroyed production facilities with surrounding areas largely intact. Either the Americans had gotten impossibly lucky repeatedly, or they possessed technology the Luftwaffe didn't understand. The B-24 arrived 3 days later on a heavy transport train, accompanied by 2 SS guards and a Gestapo technical intelligence officer. The bomber had sustained moderate damage: one engine destroyed by flak, hydraulic lines severed, dozens of bullet holes through the fuselage, but the critical components were intact. All 4 Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines could be evaluated. The defensive armament was complete, and most importantly, the device secured in the nose compartment, surrounded by thermite charges that had failed to detonate, was undamaged. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The bombardier's station in a B-24 sits in the aircraft's nose, a plexiglass bubble that gives an unobstructed view downward and forward. When Christiansen climbed through the forward hatch and crawled into that compartment, he found himself staring at what American crews called the Norden Mark 15 bomb site. It didn't look like much. 50 pounds of metal, gears, and optical components mounted on a bracket. But the security measures told a different story. The device had been chained to its mount with hardened steel links. The thermite charges positioned around it were military-grade incendiaries designed to melt the entire mechanism into slag. And according to the Gestapo officer's interrogation report, the captured bombardier had tried to destroy it even while wounded and under guard. German intelligence had known about the Norden since 1941. Reports from agents in the United States described extraordinary security around its manufacture, armed guards at the factory, individual serial numbers for each unit. Bombardiers swore formal oaths never to discuss its capabilities. The level of protection suggested something far beyond conventional bomb sites. The Luftwaffe's own Lotfernrohr 7 bomb site was classified, certainly, but it didn't require armed escorts or destruction protocols. Whatever the Americans had built, they considered it worth more than the aircraft carrying it. Christiansen spent the first day simply documenting the device. Every component was photographed from multiple angles. Every gear and linkage was sketched by technical illustrators. The serial number, Norden Mark 15-2743, was recorded and transmitted to intelligence headquarters for cross-referencing against other captured units. Only 2 other Nordens had fallen into German hands previously. One had been successfully destroyed by its bombardier before capture. The other had been damaged beyond analysis when the bomber crashed. This was the first opportunity to examine a functional unit. The vacuum pump system mounted in the fuselage was immediately recognizable as a power source for gyroscopes. The Germans used similar pumps in their own aircraft instruments, though never at this scale. The Norden's pump was pulling 7.5 cubic feet of air per minute, an enormous volume that suggested gyroscopes far larger and more powerful than anything in German bomb sites. Christiansen ordered the vacuum system tested. When technicians activated it, they could hear the gyroscopes inside the site spinning up, a high-pitched whine that climbed in frequency for nearly 15 minutes before stabilizing. The optical system was the next revelation. German bomb sites used relatively simple telescopes with manual tracking mechanisms. The bombardier looked through the scope, kept the crosshairs on target through hand controls, and released them based on calculated timing. The Norden's telescope was mounted on a complex gimbal system that moved independently of the site's main housing. When technicians tilted the entire device, the telescope stayed level, locked onto its original orientation by the spinning gyroscopes. This automatic stabilization was far beyond anything the Luftwaffe 7 could achieve. But the real mystery was the mechanical computer integrated into the site's base. A cylindrical housing, approximately 6 inches in diameter, contained what appeared to be hundreds of precision gears, cams, and rotating discs. Some components were marked with English abbreviations: trail computer, drift calculator, range integrator. The Germans understood generally what these terms meant, but not how the mechanisms actually performed the calculations. Christiansen made a decision that would prove more significant than anyone realized at the time. They would test the Norden operationally, using the captured B-24 as a flying test bed. The Rechlin facility had everything needed for bombing trials: a test range on the Baltic coast with radar tracking stations and impact measurement equipment. Captured American bombs, both 500 and 1,000-pounders, taken from damaged bombers or unexploded ordnance. And, most critically, German bombardiers trained to read English technical manuals and operate foreign equipment. The challenge was getting the B-24 airworthy. The bomber had suffered significant battle damage, but Rechlin's maintenance crews were among the best in the Luftwaffe. They'd kept captured Soviet aircraft flying despite having no spare parts or technical documentation. An American bomber with English-language maintenance manuals and some available spare parts from other damaged B-24 seconds was actually easier. The destroyed engine was replaced with one salvaged from a B-24 that had crashed near Hamburg. Hydraulic lines were repaired using German equivalents. The fuel system was purged and tested. Within 2 weeks, the bomber was ready for ground runs. The first engine tests revealed something German engineers found remarkable. The Wright Cyclone engines were incredibly robust and maintained power output even with significant damage. One engine that had been hit by shrapnel and was missing several cylinder cooling fins still produced 85% of rated horsepower. German engines typically lost much more performance from comparable damage. The Americans were building their power plants with extraordinary durability margins. On August 9, 1943, the captured B-24 flew for the first time under German control. Hauptmann Werner Baumbach, one of Rechlin's most experienced test pilots, took it up with a minimal crew. No bombs, limited fuel, just a checkout flight to verify airworthiness and handling characteristics. The bomber performed adequately, though Baumbach noted it was less responsive than German bombers and required more physical effort to control. What impressed him was the aircraft's stability at high altitude. At 25,000 feet, the B-24 flew straight and level with minimal input, a crucial characteristic for precision bombing. The bombing trials began 3 days later. The test protocol was straightforward. Fly the B-24 to the Baltic range at 25,000 feet. Approach a clearly marked target, a concrete structure designed to simulate a factory building. Have a German bombardier use the Norden site exactly as American crews did. Measure accuracy. Compare results to what German bomb sites could achieve. Oberleutnant Klaus Hoffmann drew the assignment as primary bombardier. He'd trained on the Luftwaffe 7 and had combat experience on Heinkel He 111 during the Battle of Britain. He understood bombing fundamentals and could read technical English reasonably well. More importantly, he'd spent a week studying Norden's operation manual, a classified document captured with the bomber. The manual was remarkably detailed, describing procedures for pre-flight checks, gyroscope activation, input parameters, and the bombing run itself. The first attempt was purely experimental. Hoffmann followed the manual's procedures exactly. 15 minutes before the bombing run, he activated the vacuum pump and waited for the gyroscopes to reach full speed. He input altitude, 25,000 feet, using a dial on the site's left side. His input indicated airspeed, 190 miles per hour, using another dial. Then came the critical step. Using the Norden's telescope, he acquired the target and began tracking it. This is where Norden's sophistication became apparent. As Hoffman tracked the target, the site automatically calculated ground speed by measuring how fast the target moved through the crosshairs. This eliminated the need for manual drift calculations, one of the most error-prone steps in conventional bomb aiming. The mechanical computer inside the site continuously solved the ballistic equations, adjusting for the calculated wind drift and determining the precise release point. The manual called this the synchronous bombing method. The bombardier maintained the crosshairs on target while the computer ran continuously. When the aircraft reached the exact three-dimensional coordinates where bomb release would result in a hit, an electrical circuit was completed. Hoffman pressed the release button. A single 500-pound practice bomb dropped away. From 25,000 feet, the bomb took approximately 40 seconds to fall. During that time, it travelled forward nearly 2 miles, following a parabolic trajectory shaped by gravity, air resistance, and the wind aloft. Hoffman couldn't see where it landed. At that altitude, even through the telescope, impact points were invisible. They had to wait for the radar tracking station's report. The radio crackled 12 minutes later. The bomb had impacted 73 meters from the target center. 73 meters. That's 239 feet. On the first attempt, with a German bombardier who'd never used the device operationally, in a captured American bomber, the Norden had put a bomb within 240 feet of a specific building from nearly 5 miles up. Christiansen, monitoring from the ground, immediately ordered verification. The result was too good. There had to be measurement error or lucky conditions. They flew the same profile again the next day. Different bombardier, same target. Impact at 81 meters, 266 feet. A third test with Hoffman back in the bombardier's seat. Impact at 68 meters, 223 feet. The pattern held across 15 trials over 2 weeks. Average accuracy, 82 meters, 269 feet. Under ideal conditions, no fighters, no flak, clear weather, the Norden was consistently placing bombs within 300 feet of the aim point from 25,000 feet. The best German bombardiers using the Luftwaffe 7 under the same conditions averaged 450 to 600 meters. The Norden was twice as accurate, possibly more. But it was the consistency that disturbed German analysts most. With conventional bomb sights, accuracy varied wildly depending on bombardier skill. An expert might hit within 300 meters. A novice might miss by a kilometer. Norden removed most of that variation. The machine did the calculations. The bombardier just had to track the target and trust the release signal. Skill still mattered, but the device had raised the baseline dramatically. Christiansen's report to Luftwaffe headquarters, dated August 27, 1943, was carefully worded but couldn't hide the implications. The Americans possessed a bombing technology that fundamentally changed strategic warfare. Precision bombing wasn't propaganda. It was achievable, repeatable engineering. The device required substantial training and functioned best under favorable conditions, but it worked. German industrial facilities could be hit with accuracy that made every raid potentially catastrophic. The report triggered immediate reactions at multiple levels. Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, reportedly refused to believe the results initially, insisting they must represent optimal conditions that wouldn't replicate in combat. Albert Speer, the armaments minister, took it more seriously. He ordered immediate dispersal of critical industries and acceleration of underground factory construction. If the Americans could hit specific buildings, concentration of production became suicide. But the more interesting reaction came from the technical intelligence branch. They wanted to understand not just what the Norden could do, but how it worked. Reverse engineering began immediately at multiple facilities. The captured site was carefully disassembled at the Luftwaffe Research Institute in Berlin-Adlershof. Every gear was measured, every cam profile was traced. The gyroscope assemblies were studied in detail. Carl Zeiss Optical Works analyzed the telescope system. German engineers tried to determine whether they could replicate the device or at least incorporate its principles into improved German bomb sites. The analysis revealed extraordinary manufacturing precision. The gyroscope bearings were machined to tolerances German factories, typically reserved for laboratory instruments, not combat equipment. The gears meshed with virtually no backlash, meaning the mechanical computer's calculations were highly accurate. The entire device was designed with redundancy and error correction built into its mechanical architecture. If one component wore slightly, others compensated. But what struck German engineers most was the integration. The Norden wasn't just a bomb site, it was a complete bombing system. The gyroscopes provided stabilization. The mechanical computer solved trajectory equations. The optical system allowed target tracking, and in later models, integration with the aircraft's autopilot allowed the bomb site to actually fly the aircraft during the bombing run, removing even the pilot from the equation. The Americans had achieved true automated bombing, at least for those final critical minutes before release. The question became whether Germany could build something equivalent. The engineering was clearly possible. German precision manufacturing was world-class. Zeiss could make better optics than anything in the Norden. German gyroscope technology was excellent, used extensively in submarines and fire control systems. The mechanical computation wasn't beyond German capabilities either. Analog computers existed throughout German military systems. The problem was resources and time. Developing and manufacturing a German equivalent would require years and enormous industrial capacity. The Norden represented 15 years of development by Carl Norden's company, refined through hundreds of prototypes and thousands of test flights. Each unit required approximately 200 man-hours of skilled labor to assemble and calibrate. Germany, in 1943, was already struggling to produce enough conventional bomb sites for its bomber force, which was shrinking rapidly under Allied air superiority. More fundamentally, strategic bombing was becoming irrelevant to Germany's situation. The Luftwaffe had effectively abandoned long-range bombing campaigns by 1943, focusing instead on tactical support for ground forces and air defense of the Reich. Developing an advanced bomb site for bombers that no longer flew strategic missions made no sense. The Norden was a weapon for an offensive air campaign. Germany was fighting a defensive war. The captured B-24 continued flying tests at Rechlin through September 1943, but the focus shifted from the Norden to other aspects of American bomber technology. Engineers evaluated the defensive armament, noting that the 50 caliber Browning machine guns had higher muzzle velocity and better armor penetration than German 13mm weapons. They analyzed the self-sealing fuel tanks, which German engineers had developed independently, but the Americans had refined with superior rubber compounds. They tested the turbochargers that gave the Wright Cyclone engines their high-altitude performance. Every aspect of the B-24 revealed the same pattern. American engineering wasn't necessarily more advanced than German engineering in terms of theoretical understanding, but it was far more focused on practical combat reliability and mass production. The Norden bomb site exemplified this philosophy. It wasn't the most sophisticated bombing computer theoretically possible. German engineers could conceptualize more advanced systems using electronic computers and radar tracking, but the Norden existed. It worked. And most importantly, America was building them by the thousands. By October 1943, the captured B-24 had logged 47 test flights and dropped 116 practice bombs using the Norden site. The accuracy statistics remained consistent. Under ideal conditions, trained bombardiers achieved 250 to 300 feet accuracy from 25,000 feet. Under simulated combat conditions, with the aircraft maneuvering to avoid simulated flak and fighters, accuracy degraded to 400 to 600 feet, still better than conventional German bomb sites. The final report from Rechlin, submitted to Luftwaffe headquarters in November 1943, contained conclusions that were simultaneously technical and strategic. Technically, the Norden Mark 15 represented the most advanced bomb site in operational use by any nation. Its gyroscopic stabilization and integrated mechanical computer gave American bombardiers capabilities German crews couldn't match. The device required excellent manufacturing quality and extensive training, but delivered measurable superiority in bombing accuracy. Strategically, the implications were darker. American precision bombing wasn't propaganda or luck. It was systematic industrial destruction enabled by superior technology. The raids that were devastating German oil refineries, ball-bearing plants, and aircraft factories weren't hitting those facilities by accident or through mass bombing. They were hitting them because American bombardiers could see targets from 25,000 feet and drop bombs within a few hundred feet of where they aimed. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Norden's operational effectiveness over Germany told a more complex story than the Rechlin test suggested. Real combat introduced variables that testing ranges couldn't replicate. But the fundamental capability remained. American bombers could hit what they aimed at with unprecedented accuracy. The question became how German defenses could respond. The Luftwaffe's fighter tactics evolved throughout 1943 and 1944, partially in response to the precision bombing threat. If American bombers could destroy specific factories, then disrupting their bombing runs before release became critical. German fighters focused increasingly on head-on attacks during those final minutes when bombers flew straight and level for the Norden to calculate trajectories. Break up the formation, force evasive maneuvers, and the Norden's accuracy degraded. Flak batteries received new targeting priorities. Instead of simply shooting at bomber formations, batteries were positioned to force bombers off their bombing runs through proximity fire. Even if shells didn't destroy aircraft, the threat forced evasive action that disrupted the precise flying needed for Norden accuracy. German anti-aircraft command analyzed American bombing patterns and positioned flak to create barriers that bombers had to fly through during their final approach. These defensive adaptations reduced Norden effectiveness significantly compared to testing conditions. American operational records from 1943 show average bombing accuracy of 600 to 800 feet under combat conditions, roughly double the Rechlin test results. Heavy fighter opposition could degrade accuracy to over 1,000 feet. Weather, always a factor in European operations, sometimes forced bombing through clouds using radar, which eliminated the Norden's precision entirely. But even degraded, the Norden gave American bombers capabilities German forces couldn't match. The August 17, 1943 raids on Schweinfurt and Regensburg demonstrated this with brutal clarity. Those missions cost the 8th Air Force 60 B-17 seconds and 600 crewmen. The casualties were catastrophic. But the bombs hit their targets. Schweinfurt's ball-bearing plants sustained damage that reduced German production by 38%. Regensburg's Messerschmitt factories stopped building Me-109s for 6 weeks. German intelligence studied the Schweinfurt bombing photographs in detail. The bomb patterns showed clear concentration on specific factory buildings. The main production halls were destroyed or heavily damaged. Adjacent worker housing was largely intact. This wasn't the random destruction of area bombing. It was surgical targeting that killed Germany's industrial capacity while minimizing collateral damage. The precision was terrifying from a strategic perspective. Albert Speer's memoirs, written after the war, devoted significant attention to the Schweinfurt raids. He calculated that 2 or 3 more attacks of similar effectiveness would have collapsed Germany's ability to produce military equipment. The ball bearings made at Schweinfurt were critical to everything from tank transmissions to aircraft engines to artillery pieces. Destroying that production created cascading failures throughout German industry. The Americans had found a critical node and had the technology to actually destroy it. The Germans never developed a comparable bomb site. Several programs attempted to improve the Luftwaffe, including Project Knickerbein and later iterations of radio-guided bombing, but none achieved the Norden's combination of accuracy and reliability. By late 1944, German bomber forces had been reduced to tactical roles and night harassment missions, where precision bombing was impossible anyway. The strategic bombing war had become entirely defensive, protecting German cities and industry from Allied bombers, rather than attacking Allied production. The captured B-24 at Rechlin flew its last test mission in December 1943, then was relegated to ground instruction. The Norden site was removed and sent to Berlin for continued study. Several German optical companies attempted to replicate components, but the program never progressed beyond laboratory prototypes. The industrial capacity and time needed to develop a German equivalent didn't exist. What existed instead was growing recognition that America's technological superiority extended beyond any single device. The Norden exemplified a systematic approach to warfare, where engineering solved tactical problems. The Americans didn't just build better bomb sites, they built everything better. Radar systems, radio equipment, aircraft engines, defensive armament, every captured piece of American equipment told the same story. It was designed for mass production, built with excellent materials, and engineered for reliability under combat conditions. German industry could match American technology in individual cases, sometimes exceed it. But Germany couldn't match the American industrial scale. By 1944, the United States was producing one B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. Each bomber carried a Norden sight that cost more than some German aircraft. The Americans weren't just winning through better technology. They were winning through overwhelming technological mass production. The mathematical reality of the Norden's impact becomes clear when examining target destruction rates across the air war. Between August 1942 and May 1945, the 8th Air Force flew approximately 350,000 bomber sorties over Europe. Those missions dropped roughly 697,000 tons of bombs on German targets. The destruction was measured not in tonnage dropped, but in production stopped. German armaments production statistics, meticulously kept by Albert Speer's ministry and captured intact by Allied forces, provide the ground truth. In 1943, before sustained precision bombing campaigns, German aircraft production reached 25,000 aircraft. Tank production hit 19,000 units. Synthetic oil production peaked at 5.7 million tons annually. These numbers represented Germany's maximum industrial output, achieved despite earlier British area bombing campaigns. By 1944, precision bombing using the Norden and similar systems began showing measurable effects. Aircraft production in the second half of 1944 dropped to 18,000 units, despite Speer's desperate dispersal efforts. Tank production held steady, only because facilities were moved underground and into dispersed workshops. But synthetic oil production collapsed to 2.3 million tons, a 60% reduction driven almost entirely by precision attacks on refineries. The oil campaign exemplifies how the Norden enabled strategic effects impossible with area bombing. Germany operated 91 synthetic oil plants across the Reich and occupied territories. These facilities were critical because Germany lacked natural petroleum resources. Every drop of aviation fuel, every gallon of diesel for tanks, came from synthetic production using the Fischer-Tropsch process. Destroy the plants and you paralyze the military. British area bombing could damage oil plants but required hitting entire industrial complexes with thousands of tons of explosives. The American approach, enabled by Norden, targeted specific production units within each plant. The cracking towers that converted coal into liquid fuel were precise targets, tall structures visible from high altitude. The storage tanks were secondary targets. Control buildings and power plants were tertiary targets. Hit the critical nodes and production stopped even if much of the facility remained intact. The May 12, 1944 raid on the Leuna synthetic oil plant near Merseburg demonstrated the methodology. 124 B-17 seconds attacked from 23,000 feet using Norden sights. Post-strike, reconnaissance showed the main cracking towers destroyed or heavily damaged. The facility's production capacity dropped from 200,000 tons per month to 40,000 tons. That single raid, lasting approximately 40 minutes over the target, reduced German aviation fuel availability by 12%. The Luftwaffe's response proved the effectiveness. Hermann Göring issued orders prioritizing defense of synthetic oil facilities above all other targets, including Berlin. Fighter units were reassigned from Eastern Front operations to protect oil plants in central Germany. Flak batteries were concentrated around refineries in densities that exceeded even Berlin's air defenses. The Germans understood what was at stake. Lose the oil plants, and the entire war machine stopped. American planners understood the same calculation. The combined bomber offensives Operation Point Blank, formalized in June 1943, listed oil as target priority number 1. Not because oil facilities were easy to hit or lightly defended, but because destroying them created cascading effects throughout German military operations. Tanks without fuel couldn't maneuver. Aircraft without fuel couldn't intercept bombers. Trucks without fuel couldn't move supplies. The entire logistics network seized up. Norden made this targeting strategy viable. Earlier bomb sites couldn't reliably hit facilities as small as oil refineries from altitudes needed to survive flak. The British had tried attacking oil targets in 1940 through 1942 with minimal success. Bomber Command's nighttime raids scattered bombs across square miles. Some hit refineries. Most didn't. The tonnage-to-effect ratio was terrible. American daylight precision bombing, guided by Norden sights, achieved approximately 3 times the destruction per ton of bombs compared to British nighttime area bombing against industrial targets. This wasn't propaganda or post-war exaggeration. German production records confirm it. When the Americans hit an oil refinery, production stopped. When the British hit the same target with 3 times as many bombs at night, production degraded but continued. The explanation lay in how bombs damaged industrial facilities. A factory building hit by one 500-pound bomb might sustain repairable damage. Hit by 5 bombs concentrated in the same structure, the building collapsed completely, destroying machinery inside and requiring total reconstruction. Norden's accuracy allowed concentration of bomb patterns onto specific structures rather than dispersal across entire complexes. Combat box formations multiplied this effect. 18 B-17 seconds flying in tight formation and releasing on a lead bombardier's signal created bomb patterns roughly 400 feet long and 200 feet wide. That concentration, delivered with Norden accuracy, could obliterate a specific factory building in a single pass. German repair crews could fix their damaged buildings within weeks. They couldn't fix buildings that no longer existed. The human cost of achieving this precision rarely appears in technical discussions of the Norden, but it defined the experience for American aircrews. Using the Norden effectively required flying straight and level for 3 to 5 minutes during the bomb run. No evasive action, no deviations. The bombardier controlled the aircraft through the site's autopilot connection, making course corrections to keep the crosshairs precisely on target. The pilot surrendered control. Those 3 to 5 minutes were when most bombers got shot down. German flak batteries calculated trajectories based on bomber approach paths and knew approximately where formations would be during the critical bomb run period. They concentrated fire accordingly. Luftwaffe fighters learned to attack head-on during those minutes when bombers couldn't maneuver. The formation discipline required for Norden accuracy made bombing predictable, and predictability meant casualties. The Memphis Belle, one of the first B-17 seconds to complete 25 missions, survived partially through exceptional luck, but also through crew discipline during bomb runs. Pilot Robert Morgan described holding formation through flak that blew holes in the wings, shrapnel that wounded crewmen, and fighters that attacked from directly ahead. The bombardier, Vincent Evans, maintained the Norden's crosshairs on target through all of it. The bombs hit, the bomber survived, but not because the Norden protected them. because they accepted an extraordinary risk to use the device properly. Statistical analysis from 8th Air Force operations in 1943 shows the brutal trade-off. Formations that maintained strict discipline during bomb runs and used Norden sights correctly achieved 70 to 80% of bombs within 1,000 feet of aim points. But those same formations suffered casualty rates of 5 to 7% per mission. Formations that broke formation early to evade flak achieved only 40 to 50% accuracy, but reduced casualties to 3 to 4% per mission. The 8th Air Force chose accuracy. The doctrine insisted on it. Maintaining formation and executing proper Norden bombing runs was mandatory regardless of opposition. Crews who abandoned bombing runs due to flak or fighter pressure faced courts-martial unless the aircraft was severely damaged. The institutional commitment to precision bombing was absolute, and that commitment was measured in blood. By mid-1944, approximately 26,000 8th Air Force airmen had been killed in action. Another 28,000 were wounded. 18,000 were prisoners of war. These casualties represented over half of all combat aircrew members serving in the theatre. The statistical probability of surviving a 25-mission tour in 1943 was approximately 28%. The Norden gave bombardiers extraordinary capability, but it couldn't protect them from the consequences of using it. The device's psychological impact on crews was complex. Some bombardiers developed an almost superstitious attachment to their assigned Norden sight, believing it gave them better odds of survival through accurate bombing that meant fewer return missions to heavily defended targets. Others resented it, viewing the sight as the reason they had to fly straight through flak instead of taking evasive action. Everyone understood the device's value. Not everyone believed that value justified the cost. Combat fatigue studies conducted by 8th Air Force flight surgeons in 1944 documented specific stress patterns related to bombing runs. Bombardiers showed elevated stress markers during the final approach phase when they controlled the aircraft through the Norden. Heart rates increased 20 to 30%. Cortisol levels spiked. Post-mission interviews revealed that bombardiers felt responsible not just for hitting the target, but for keeping the entire formation in danger during those critical minutes. If they missed, everyone had risked their lives for nothing. The technical training required to use the Norden effectively was extraordinary by wartime standards. Bombardier training at facilities like Midland Army Airfield in Texas or Victorville Army Flying School in California required approximately 15 weeks. Students spent 60 hours in classroom instruction covering ballistics, aerodynamics, aircraft recognition, and the Norden's mechanical systems. They spent another 80 hours in practical training, first using ground-based trainers, then flying actual bombing missions over practice ranges. The ground trainers were sophisticated devices, essentially simulators that replicated the Norden's operation and allowed students to practice bomb runs without actually flying. The ANT-18 trainer, developed in 1942, used moving film strips to simulate target approaches. Students sat at a Norden sight connected to the trainer and practiced tracking targets, while the film moved beneath them at speeds simulating various altitudes and airspeeds. When they released, the trainer calculated impact point and provided immediate feedback. This training infrastructure represented massive investment. By 1944, the Army Air Forces operated 17 bombardier schools across the United States. Each school had dozens of instructors, hundreds of training aircraft, and secure facilities for storing and maintaining Norden sites. The training pipeline produced approximately 500 new bombardiers per month, each one spending over 200 hours learning to use a single device. The security apparatus around the Norden extended throughout the training pipeline. Students swore their formal oaths at the beginning of bombardier school. The sites used for training were stored in vaults. Guards accompanied students to and from aircraft. The training manuals were classified documents that students could only access in supervised classrooms. Even after graduation, bombardiers couldn't discuss the Norden's technical details with pilots or other crew members who lacked bombardier classification. This security obsession had practical roots. The Norden represented approximately 15 years of development and somewhere between $1.5 and $2 billion in total program costs. That's $1940, equivalent to roughly $30 billion today. Each individual site cost $8,000 to manufacture, more expensive than many of the aircraft carrying them. Losing one to enemy capture meant potentially giving away years of technological advantage. The Germans' acquisition of an intact Norden at Rechlin in July 1943 represented exactly the security breach American planners feared. But by that point in the war, the breach mattered less than it would have in 1941 or 1942. Germany lacked the industrial capacity and time to develop comparable systems. More importantly, Germany's strategic situation meant sophisticated bomb sites had minimal value. The Luftwaffe wasn't flying deep penetration bombing missions. They were defending the Reich from Allied air superiority. The irony wasn't lost on German technical intelligence analysts. They possessed one of America's most closely guarded secrets, had tested it extensively, understood its capabilities, and couldn't do anything with the information. The Norden was a weapon for an offensive strategic bombing campaign. Germany was fighting for survival. The technological knowledge was academically interesting but strategically irrelevant. What mattered more to German defences was understanding how to counter the Norden's effectiveness. The Rechlin tests provided valuable intelligence about the device's limitations. It required stable flying during the final approach. It degraded significantly in poor visibility. Violent, evasive maneuvers disrupted the gyroscope's stabilization. These weaknesses informed German tactical responses. Luftwaffe fighter units received updated attack doctrine in late 1943, specifically designed to disrupt Norden bombing accuracy. Instead of attacking bomber formations from behind or below where defensive fire was concentrated, fighters made aggressive head-on passes during the final bomb run phase. The goal wasn't necessarily to shoot down bombers, though that was welcomed. The goal was to force formations to break apart and take evasive action, which ruined bombing accuracy even if most aircraft survived. This tactic worked but came with high costs for German fighters. Head-on attacks against combat box formations meant flying directly into concentrated defensive fire from dozens of 50 caliber machine guns. The closure rate between a fighter diving at 350 miles per hour and a bomber flying at 180 miles per hour was over 500 miles per hour. That gave fighter pilots approximately 3 seconds to aim, fire, and break off before collision. Many didn't make it. Head-on attacks produced German fighter losses that approached 20% per mission against heavily defended formations. The Germans also enhanced flak defences around critical targets, particularly oil refineries and ball-bearing plants. By late 1944, facilities like the Leuna oil plant had flak densities exceeding 200 guns per square mile. The sky over these targets was literally filled with exploding shells during bombing runs. American bomber crews called it flak you could walk on. The barrage forced pilots to make minor evasive adjustments even during bomb runs, which degraded Norden accuracy from the 250-foot precision achieved in testing to 600 or 800 feet in combat. But even degraded to 600 feet, the Norden remained far more accurate than any alternative. British bomb sites like the Mark 14 achieved approximately 1,200 to 1,500 feet accuracy under similar conditions. Soviet bomb sites were even less precise. German bomb sites, as the Rechlin tests confirmed, fell between 800 and 1,000 feet. Norden's advantage persisted throughout the war. The device's legacy extended far beyond World War II. Every precision guidance system developed afterward traced conceptual lineage to Carl Norden's work. The gyroscopic stabilization principles became fundamental to inertial navigation systems used in ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and eventually spacecraft. The mechanical computation architecture influenced early electronic computers designed for fire control and navigation. The immediate post-war period saw continued Norden production for several years. The Army Air Forces, which became the independent United States Air Force in 1947, maintained Norden-equipped bombers through the early 1950s. The B-29 Superfortress, which dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, used Norden sights for conventional bombing missions over Japan. The sight's accuracy enabled the devastatingly effective firebombing campaigns against Japanese cities in 1945. But technology was evolving rapidly. Radar-guided bombing systems developed during the war offered capabilities the Norden couldn't match, particularly all-weather operations and night bombing. The H-2X radar system, operational from late 1943 onward, allowed bombing through clouds and darkness with accuracy approaching 1,000 feet. Not as precise as clear-weather Norden bombing, but far more flexible operationally. By the mid-1950s, the Norden was obsolete. The introduction of jet bombers, like the B-47 Stratojet, required completely new bombing systems designed for high-speed, high-altitude operations. Norden's mechanical computer couldn't calculate trajectories fast enough for aircraft traveling at 500 miles per hour. More importantly, the emerging doctrine of nuclear weapons delivery made precision bombing accuracy less critical. When your bomb has a 10-kiloton yield, you don't need to hit within 300 feet. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, represented Norden's last significant combat use. B-29 bombers, equipped with Norden sights, flew interdiction missions against North Korean bridges, rail yards, and industrial facilities. The accuracy remained impressive by contemporary standards. But the sight was showing its age. Maintenance became increasingly difficult as spare parts became scarce. Training new bombardiers on the device seemed wasteful when newer systems existed. Carl Norden himself lived to see his invention become obsolete. He continued working on refinements and updates through the late 1940s, but by 1950 his company had shifted focus to other defense contracts. He died in 1965 at age 84, largely forgotten by the public despite his device's role in winning World War II. His obituary in the New York Times was 3 paragraphs long. It mentioned his work on bomb sites but didn't go into detail, the security classification having persisted decades after the war ended. The final irony of the Norden story is that its classification persisted far longer than its operational usefulness. The device remained officially classified until 1975, 30 years after the war ended, and 20 years after it was removed from active service. By the time the classification was lifted, the technology was so obsolete that declassification was purely academic. Nobody was building mechanical analog computers for bomb aiming anymore. The entire concept belonged to history. Modern precision bombing traces clear lineage to the Norden, but has evolved beyond recognition. GPS-guided munitions like the Joint Direct Attack munition achieve accuracy measured in feet rather than hundreds of feet. Laser-guided bombs can hit specific windows in buildings. The pickle-barrel accuracy Carl Norden promised in the 1920s is now routine with weapons that cost a fraction of what the Norden sight did. But the fundamental problem Norden solved, how to hit what you're aiming at from a moving platform, remains central to every precision weapon system. The gyroscopic stabilization he pioneered evolved into ring laser gyroscopes and fiber optic gyroscopes. The mechanical computation became electronic, then digital. The vacuum-powered gyroscopes became solid-state accelerometers, but the principles stayed constant. Create a stable reference frame. Calculate trajectories automatically. Remove human error from the equation. The B-24 tested at Rechlin flew its last mission in December 1943, then was dismantled for parts. The Norden sight removed. From it was studied extensively at Berlin-Adlershof, then disappeared during the Soviet advance in 1945. Whether it was destroyed, captured by Soviet forces, or lost in the chaos remains unknown. Several Norden sites did end up in Soviet hands after the war, transported east as war reparations. Soviet engineers studied them and incorporated some principles into their own bombing systems, though they never achieved comparable accuracy. The testing reports from Rechlin survived the war and were captured by American forces in May 1945. Technical intelligence analysts read German assessments of American bombing technology with considerable interest. The reports confirmed what operational experience had already shown. The Norden worked as advertised, achieving accuracy that transformed strategic bombing from theory into practice. Friedrich Christiansen, the Luftwaffe colonel who supervised the Rechlin tests, survived the war and was briefly interrogated by American technical intelligence teams. He reportedly expressed professional respect for Norden's engineering, while noting that Germany's situation by 1943 made sophisticated bomb sites irrelevant to the outcome. Klaus Hoffmann, the bombardier who flew most of the test missions, was killed in action over Berlin in February 1944 while serving with a fighter unit. His experience with Norden went to his grave. The broader lesson from the Norden story extends beyond technology. It illuminates how America approached warfare in World War II, systematically, industrially, with engineering solutions to tactical problems. Norden exemplified this philosophy. Bombing accuracy was a problem. Therefore, build a machine that solves bombing accuracy. Manufacture 22,000 of those machines. Train 50,000 bombardiers to use them. Accept the costs in money, time, and lives. Win through superior technology and overwhelming industrial capacity. Germany approached warfare differently, emphasizing operational art, tactical flexibility, and qualitative superiority. German tanks were generally better than American tanks. German fighters were often superior to American fighters. German soldiers were typically better trained than American soldiers early in the war. But Germany couldn't build enough tanks, fighters, or soldiers to match American numbers, and they couldn't build systems like the Norden that multiplied the effectiveness of the forces they did have. The Rechlin tests in July through December 1943 captured this asymmetry perfectly. German engineers understood the Norden's sophistication and could appreciate its engineering excellence, but understanding didn't equal capability. Germany lacked the industrial infrastructure, the time, and ultimately the strategic situation to develop comparable systems. By the time they had an intact Norden to study, the war's trajectory was already determined. American strategic bombing, enabled by the Norden and similar precision systems, didn't win World War II by itself. Ground forces won battles, naval forces controlled sea lanes, air superiority protected invasion fleets, but strategic bombing created conditions that made victory possible. It destroyed Germany's ability to produce fuel, armoured vehicles, and aircraft. It forced dispersion of industry, which reduced efficiency. It tied down enormous defensive resources. Flak guns defending Berlin couldn't defend the Eastern Front. Fighters intercepting bombers over Germany couldn't stop the invasion of France. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. Germany produced approximately 40,000 combat aircraft in 1944. The United States produced 96,000. Germany refined 2.3 million tons of synthetic oil in 1944. The United States produced 560 million tons of petroleum products. The disparity wasn't just production capacity. It was production security. American factories operated without threat of bombing. German factories operated under continuous air attack. The Norden bomb site didn't create that production disparity, but it magnified its effects by allowing America to target the specific nodes where destruction mattered most: oil refineries, ball-bearing plants, aircraft factories, transportation networks. Each target chosen through systematic analysis of German industry. Each target hit with precision that made the attacks effective. Each attack was enabled by bombardiers looking through 50 pounds of gyroscopes and gears while men died around them. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.